Good evening, and welcome to the Homeschooling Workshop. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight and to be able to share with you. This is an introductory presentation tonight. I know many of you are here considering homeschooling for the first time. Perhaps you've had a lot of questions and you've talked to a few friends about it, and they've suggested that you drop in here tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions. Before we get into the first session, I'd like to take you on a little walk down some interesting comments that I receive all over the country as I travel and speak. As I travel and speak, I find the questions are very predictable. People have all kinds of concerns about homeschooling. And so I'd like to just take you with us into the future. And let's assume that 25 years from now, people have become so accustomed to processed foods and pre-prepared foods that very few people cook at home anymore. And one day you are out in the backyard with an antique barbecue grill and you're grilling old-fashioned hamburgers, and your neighbor drives in and sees you through the force field or whatever they're using to separate yards at that point, and sees you over there and you're cooking for your family. Now, these are some of the questions that she might have. First of all, she says, our children are too valuable a resource to be left to amateur cooks. Only certified nutritionists should be allowed to cook. Home kitchen equipment is never adequate. All children should eat 3 standardized meals per day in government cafeterias. Home-cooked meals can be abusive. Now, I can vouch for that one. But how about this? Children need to eat with other children in order to learn proper table manners. No, I could never cook for my children every day, so I send them to the local restaurants. They're professionals. And then finally, for those who have a relative or perhaps a spouse who works in the restaurant industry, if everyone cooked at home, the restaurants would close and millions would starve. Now, these comments all sound ridiculous to us because we still live in a time in which cooking at home is the norm. People expect it. But in the past, and not the too distant past either, there was a time in which teaching children at home was just as much the norm. It was expected. And anyone who didn't teach their children at home would be questioned because it just was part of life. Before we get into the first session, I'd like to introduce you to my family. The Harris clan has expanded over the last few years, and you'll see here on the overhead my wife Sono, who, by the way, is going to be speaking tomorrow for you. This is kind of a rare opportunity. She's going to be here, and she's going to be sharing with you on homeschool organization. You'll see at the center at the top there is my son Joshua, and then hugging Sono is, I believe that's Alex. No, that's Brett. And then over here we've got Alex at the other end in front of me. Now, these are identical twins. They're now 3 years old. And down here in the front is our son Joel. He is 9 years old. And then finally in the center is little Sarah, and she is just 1 year old. Now, I know you can't see Sarah very well, so I arranged to have another picture of Sarah. And as you can see, she is a sweetheart and has just the entire family wrapped around her little finger, and we just really praise the Lord for her. So the Harris household is doing very well. And you're going to be hearing also from Joshua tomorrow. He's going to be sharing with you concerning why homeschool through high school. And I hope that you will be here for that. That's an important session. I believe it will encourage you as well as give you something to say to your teens and adolescents when they begin to wonder whether or not we should try the schools out now and let's go to school. Josh has some answers for you at that point. Our first session is entitled, Why Homeschool? And in this session, I'm going to deal with some of the most common questions that come to us when we mention the subject of homeschooling, it's not unusual to hear the question, well, what about socialization? How many of you have ever heard that question? Raise your hand. Yeah, about 90%. Well, that is the most common question across the country. People are concerned about the social training of your children. What they really want to know is, aren't you worried that your children will grow up to be nerds? And the answer, honestly, should be, yeah, occasionally we are, you know. But when they ask me that question, I like to just snap my fingers and say, well, I never thought of that, you know. Socialization, that's right. What about socialization? The truth is, the reason for homeschooling, one of the primary reasons, is because we can provide a better social training for our children. The second question we're going to deal with is the question of academics. Your children are going to receive not only a satisfactory educational program, but a superior academic educational program. And then the final question usually is posed along the lines of, doesn't it take a tremendous amount of dedication to teach your children at home? Now, I would like to think that most parents have settled the issue of dedication when they decided to have children. But I know that there are many ways that we can relieve ourselves of the responsibility of children. There are various child abandonment centers that have been organized and developed, and they're all doing very well in the United States and Canada today. But what I like to think of is, these are lifestyle issues. Is it a more difficult lifestyle to teach your children at home? The answer is no. In fact, it's much simpler and easier to live as a homeschooling family than it is to live as a family using the conventional educational services. So the three major advantages of homeschooling are the social advantage, the academic advantage, and the lifestyle advantage. You may be wondering, well, what about the spiritual advantage? We're called Christian Life Workshops. Don't we have anything to say about that? Yes, indeed. In fact, tonight I'm going to be sharing extensively from the Bible, from the Word of God. I believe that the Bible is so important that it shouldn't be compartmentalized into one or another of the advantages, but rather should be the overriding light that illuminates these other three. And so tonight, as I share with you what I believe are the advantages of homeschooling, we are going to look into the Word of God. If you're here tonight and you are not a believer, if you're not a Christian at this time, I want you to relax and enjoy yourself tonight. We're not going to come down on you. We want to, in fact, encourage you to be the best possible mom or dad that you can be. If you've been trained and raised up and educated in the public schools, just do what you've been trained to do. Be open-minded, and don't be prejudiced just because I'm going to be referring to the Bible. Even if you only consider this to be great literature, it has something important to say to you. And I believe that you'll find that the wisdom of the Scriptures will ring true in your experience as well. We'll begin by looking at the social advantage of homeschooling. And in order to understand the social advantage, we have to first understand the difference between an age-integrated setting and an age-segregated setting. Now here you see various age groups all moving in the direction that we call up. When children are expected to grow, which way are they expected to grow? Grow up. Why don't you grow up? And the youngest wants to grow up in this age-integrated situation. He's spending his time with all these other aged individuals, and he sees what they're doing, and he's interested in it, isn't he? The youngest wants to do what the middleborn is doing. The middleborn wants to do what the firstborn is doing. The audacious firstborn wants to do what you're doing. Why does he have to go to bed? You're not going to bed yet. Have you ever noticed how your firstborn child wants to be considered a member of the parental team? He doesn't want to be treated like a child. In addition, the elders are above parents. Now, elders are not only the elders in your church, but they're the elders in your family. You should have brothers and sisters or your own parents or others who are able to guide you and inspire you and encourage you in what you're doing. You shouldn't have to be the top of the list, in other words. And the very top of the list we find our Lord Jesus Christ himself. He is the ultimate example. As Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. And so that is our ultimate role model. Now, in this age-integrated setting, everyone is trying to grow up. There's no doubt as to which way is up, and the social dynamics, the forces in this situation encourage everyone to reach for something higher than what comes easily for them, to be a little bit more self-controlled, to be a little better behaved, and to be able to be interested in things that are a little bit more important and less trivial. But even in this age-integrated setting, the way that God intended your home to be, the way He intended your church to be, and in fact your neighborhood, the real world is an age-integrated world. Even in this age-integrated world, we can find some negative consequences. And it all has to do with the way we manage our household. Consider for a moment the fact that the firstborn child is the most likely to go the farthest and fastest in his particular calling in life. This is the child that's most likely to be the head of whatever he gets involved in. He has drive. This is the child that you can expect to really excel. Why is the firstborn child that way? It is not genetic. It is the consequence of his social experience as a child. Now, one of the things that tips us off in this area is that this firstborn child is the child that is most likely to have the largest vocabulary of any other sibling in the same family. Now, why do you think that would be? The answer is because he spends the early years of his life talking to people who already know the language. Everyone else talks to a combination of parents and this firstborn child. This child is going to be looking at his parents as his primary role models. And for him to try to behave as they behave requires him to really reach and stretch, and it becomes a part of his personality. He's trying to imitate the giants in his life. And the result is that he develops a personality style that has drive and a desire to excel. Now, the middle-born child is not usually going to have that same experience because he's raised by a combination of parents and this firstborn child. And here's what happens. When you're in the kitchen and you're working at something, Mom, and you hear this scream at the other end of the house, what do you do when you only have one child? You drop everything and you go see what's wrong with the baby. But a few years go by and you're in the kitchen and you're working and you hear a similar scream, and instead of going to see, you turn to this firstborn child and say, go see what's wrong with the baby. You just sent a fool on a mission. That child is not going to receive anything like what this firstborn child received, because this firstborn child has good days and bad days. This child can get emotional whiplash from the changing moods of the firstborn child who's been sent to see what he's doing. Now, the youngest child is going to get an entirely different experience. The middle-born child is usually going to be very diplomatic. He's very sensitive to other people's feelings because of the experiences he has. But this youngest child is the most likely to still be living at home at the age of 25 or 30. This is the child who seems to have no drive, no desire to get out and get started with life. Why would that be? Could it be that this child spent the earliest years of his life only wanting to be like an older child, and now he's made it? This relationship that we see even within your own household can be negative if we allow age segregation to set in. There should not be great distance between the youngest child and parents. The key to having children who all have the character and the drive, the personality of a firstborn child, is to give every child the rearing of a firstborn in his season. Now that means we manage our household a little differently. We don't delegate our younger children to our older children. We delegate other things to our older children so that we are free to give more time to the youngest members of the family. Now that one principle alone will dramatically improve your family life. If all we were doing was observing with our human minds these consequences of age integration, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But when we turn to Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20, we find the Word of God telling us, "He who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm." If even in your own household your children can suffer harm by being too much the companion of a youngster and not enough of a companion of the wise, how much more will they suffer harm when we see them in an age-segregated setting, which is what a conventional school is all about. In the age-segregated setting of a conventional school, the classroom is dominated by children. Even though the adults try to administer a presiding presence in the classroom, numerically, the adults are very much on the weak end of things. They are not going to be able to dominate socially. The children are going to be much more concerned with pleasing one another than they are in pleasing the teacher. Those of you who've been through conventional schools, stop and think about, what do they call the children who are too much concerned with pleasing the teacher? Is there a name for that child? The teacher's pet. Is that a high social position to have? No. You're going to be ostracized. You're going to be put in your place. They'll let you know fast that in this classroom, in this school, being too interested in pleasing the older and wiser members in the school is not a good idea. And yet, in terms of the long run of this child's life, what would be the best use of that child's energies? Pleasing friends or pleasing the teacher? As you can see, the companion of fools suffers harm. All children at this age influence one another in such a way that they confuse one another as to which way is up. Which way is the path to maturity? In an age-segregated situation, you can't tell which way is up. In fact, the tallest trees get struck by social lightning. They get leveled off. They get zapped. And the stagnation of maturity levels is the result. Nobody wants to stand out too much in the crowd. The whole idea of being liked is a matter of being a little bit more like everybody else. Now, what happens to the little one who has special gifting in an area? For instance, a little boy who loves to play the piano and can play classical music, and when mom and dad are standing there listening, they're just swooning. Grandma and grandpa just, it's wonderful. Even the older brothers and sisters are impressed by this youngster's ability to play the piano. But you let that same youngster go to school. He sits down to play the piano, and the others gather around and they say, "What song is that? Don't you know anything we know? Can't you play this song that's on the radio?" Now, do you think that little one is going to turn around and say, "You need a music appreciation course. You are young and ignorant and have no idea what great music sounds like"? No, they don't do that. Do you know what they do? They lose interest in their piano playing. They lose interest in their art. They might even want to change instruments and play something that's a little bit more popular. Popular with who? Mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and older brothers and sisters were already impressed. But none of that matters anymore, because now this child wants to please his age mates. Do you see what's happening? His admiration is shifting. He's become overly concerned with his peers. Now, what these children will do over a period of time is pool their ignorance. They will come up with standards by which to judge one another. If you happen to have buck teeth, sorry for you. If you're a little girl with bright red hair and freckles, you're not going to do very well. These kids have standards that they're going to use as a criteria for deciding who's in and who's out, who's cool and who's uncool. In fact, in the earliest years of a child's life, they don't have the emotional stability to be able to demonstrate their commitment to one another without agreeing with one another to reject someone else. And that is the way children show their loyalty to one another. Children will look for somebody to reject because that is their way of proving to one another that they're really good friends. Now, does that sound familiar to some of you who've had two kids over to play with your child? And what happens? One of those children ends up being odd man out. One of them is ostracized and rejected by the other two. And the other two are not intending to be mean so much as they're intending to be loyal to one another. Now, the solution to this is don't have more than one child over to play with your children at any one time. And insist that the child be friends of the entire family and that the entire family be friends of this individual child. Eventually, maturity levels rise and your children are able to have several children over at the same time without having to reject somebody. The stagnation of a child's personality usually shows up as the child losing interest in the things that make him special. He loses interest in the gifts he has, and he begins to get depressed about the gifts he doesn't have that the other kids consider to be important. Age peer dependency. Imagine standing before the mirror, looking at yourself, and surrounding you is a cloud of witnesses, in a sense. But rather than being older and wiser, heroes of the faith, cheering you on and saying, go for the gold, go for the glory, strive for excellence, instead you have a cloud of young, immature, ignorant children telling your child, you're no good. We don't like you. You don't look right. Maybe you're the wrong color. Maybe your name ends with the wrong syllable or vowel. All of these foolish ways in which children judge and condemn one another, and your child is bombarded with all of these distorted images of himself. God intended children to spend most of their time walking with the wise. And when we turn to the Proverbs in chapter 13, and verse 20, we read again, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. In 1 Corinthians 15:33, the Apostle Paul tells us, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Now, for those of you who have ever been stumped by the question, well, what about evangelism? How are we going to evangelize the world if we're not going to allow our children to be the companions of people in the world? God has an answer for that. We're going to look at that. But before we do, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the consequences of this foolishness that we see around us in the schools today. The danger of age segregation, in other words, the danger of peer dependency, is deadly. In May of 1987, a national study of 7,000 preteens, teenagers, and adults found that 15% of the 13-year-olds had tried smoking marijuana. 49% of the 17-year-olds had tried it. 5% of the 13-year-olds had tried cocaine, whereas 19% of the 17-year-olds had tried it. Now notice that what's happening, according to these statistics, is that the longer you're in school, the more likely you are to lower your standards and participate in something that you know is wrong. Why do children use self-destructive drugs? Why do they try things that we know are dangerous? Because they are no longer listening to our counsel as much as they're listening to the counsel of one another. Drug abuse is a consequence of age segregation. Premarital sex is a consequence of age segregation. When we find our children spending too much time talking to their age mates to the point that they're more concerned with pleasing one another than they are with pleasing and honoring their parents and other adults, those children begin to participate in what can be deadly activities. And the activities are becoming more and more frightening all the time. I hold in my hands a copy of Newsweek magazine. This is the March 9th issue of 1992, and the cover story is Kids and Guns, a report from America's classroom killing grounds. Now, I don't mean to fan some imaginary flames out there and create fear and panic in your hearts concerning what's happening in the public schools, but I do want you to understand that there is a certain element within the public schools that are losing touch with any sense of civilization. They are coming out of homes in which parents either don't care, or those parents are assuming that someone else is going to take care of their children and teach them right and wrong and give them a sense of which way is up. Not too long ago in Southern California, in a wealthy suburb of Southern California, there was a raid on the school locker bay area because informants had told the police that there was a lot of gang activity and drug dealing going on in this very wealthy suburban high school. The police raided the locker bay, and there in one day they confiscated 60 guns, all loaded and ready for use. But the amazing thing about this is that they found 40 of those guns in the lockers of young women who would never have been suspected of being involved with gang activity or drug dealing. And yet they found drugs and guns hidden in some of the nicest girls' lockers. And when they interviewed these young ladies and asked, why would you hide guns and drugs in your locker? The answer should put a knot in the gut of every man in this room tonight who's worthy of the title. They said, the teachers cannot protect me when I'm here. The principal and the police and the hall guards cannot guarantee my safety. My own father cannot protect me when I'm here on this campus. The only way that I can feel safe is by allying myself with one or another of the gangs that are active in this school. And then if anybody hassles me, if anybody gives me a hard time, all I have to do is say the word, and that gang is going to take care of whoever was giving me a problem. Over and over again, these young women were saying, it's just like family being in a gang. I feel safe when I'm in a gang. I know that they will come to my rescue. I know that they'll stand up and fight for me. I know that they care about me, and I don't know about the others. Now, dads, I don't know about you, but I will never, ever put my daughter or even my sons in any situation where I cannot feel responsible for their safety. I never want my children to ever feel the temptation of joining a gang, because I don't intend to put them into a situation where it would be an advantage. The schools are out of control. They know they're out of control. but there is too much money and too many careers are involved in order for them to simply pull the plug. If the schools can be turned around, if the companion of fools can be rescued, whatever changes were instituted today would not take effect for several years. And where will your children be by then? I believe that homeschooling is a solution to this problem. For those students who are academically focused and who are gifted and really intending to do well in their education, we have another report. This is from Time magazine in March the 16th of 1992. It's entitled "The Hidden Hurdle." Picture of a very lovely looking black girl sitting on the stairs of the school with her books. Subtitle, "They think that just because you're smart, they can go around beating you up." The story goes on to say that black students who show too much interest in doing well in school are picked out and attacked, specifically because they're told they are acting white. That wanting to do well in school is somehow selling out as a member of the black community. The black leaders in this community don't agree with that. They're on their knees praying to God for new black leaders to rise up, to have an education, to have a sense of direction, to not become casualties in this drug war, to not give in and get pregnant before they're married. But the teens are doing it to one another. They're pulling one another down. The companions of fools are suffering harm. And even if you don't run around with that crowd, even if you try to keep your distance from that crowd, you've got to walk past them in the halls. You've got to ride to school with them on the school bus. You've got to deal with them before and after school on the way home. Do you see what's happening? The Bible tells us bad company corrupts good character. The companion of fools suffers harm. And the solution is simply to let your children spend more time walking with the wise. And that's you. No matter how incompetent and unqualified you may feel you are, I assure you, you can do an effective job in raising your children. But let's get back to this question of evangelism. The story of a basement Bible study. In the late 1970s, early 1970s actually, Ken Carper and Bev Carper were concerned with the drug trafficking and the problems in the local high school in Centerville, Ohio. Ken was a devoted Christian. He was a teacher in the drama and science department in that high school. And he wanted to do something about it. And yet his hands were tied because the terms at that time were that teachers were not allowed to talk about their religious convictions, not in a public school. The Ten Commandments were not permitted on the campus. The Bible was not even supposed to be carried around by the students. This was a time in which the Madeline Murray O'Haras were doing very, very well. And so Ken decided, well, nobody can stop me from using my own basement as a Bible study. And so he started a home Bible study for teenagers. And in this, he first invited a few kids from his own home church. And he said, now listen, I can't invite kids to come to this study, but you can. And I'm asking you, when you're out at the malls and when you're, with your friends, tell them about this Bible study on Thursday. Every Thursday night, I'm going to be here with my Bible ready, and it'll be a question and answer Bible study. You come with a question, and we'll spend the night finding the answer in God's Word. Well, it took about 6 weeks before anybody started to show up. But finally, one young man came with a friend. He had a question, and Ken opened his Bible and helped him find an answer. And that young man came back the next week and eventually gave his heart to Christ. Now there was a new convert on campus, and as new converts are wont to do, he began to share what had happened to him with his friends. A few others came to the Bible study. They heard the gospel and they gave their hearts to Christ. Over a period of about 3 years, over 400 teenagers gave their hearts to Christ. The whole community was just electrified. Many parents were really angry. Their children were coming home as Jesus freaks, as they called them at the time. They'd rather the kids be on drugs than to come home with Jesus. Now, I don't know what happened in the lives of all 400 of those kids, but I do know what happened in the life of one of them. Because my wife, Sono, was saved in Ken Carper's basement. And she shared the gospel with her brother, Steve, and he accepted Christ. Her younger sister, Tawny, and she accepted Christ. Together they shared it with their father, and Frank Sato accepted Christ. Lily Sato, Sono's mother, accepted Christ. And ultimately, Grandma Sato, 83 years old, couldn't even speak English. But with the help of a Japanese missionary home on furlough, Grandma accepted Christ as her Lord and Savior. You know, this weekend, Lily is with my wife, helping to manage the children while we're having this workshop. She has been such a blessing. Tawny married a young pastor and is now living in Louisiana, serving the Lord together there. Steve is faithful, married a Christian young woman, and they are continuing to serve the Lord faithfully. Frank has been taken home. He's already with the Lord, and Grandma Sato as well. But do you see what happened? Do you want to really change your community? Are you really all that concerned about salt and light witness and changing the community with the gospel? Then why not just stay home and practice hospitality? Why not just use your home as an embassy of the kingdom of God? With your children beside you as apprenticeships? You see, your children need to walk with the wise. They don't need to go off into a school somewhere to be the companions of fools. They need to see somebody living the Christian life with joy and boldness. And if you want to change your community, if you want to reach kids in the public schools, I challenge you, practice hospitality toward those kids, and you will touch more lives than if you send your children to school. And your children will be there beside you, learning exactly how it's done, so that someday they'll be able to establish households of faith just like yours and continue to do these things with your grandchildren. The academic advantage of homeschooling is tremendous. But if you agree with what I've already said about the social advantage of homeschooling, this is not going to be such a big deal. I mean, it's nice, but let's face it. When we're dealing with some of the bears and lions that are roaming the streets today in the conventional schools, even if our children were going to miss out on a lab class here or a special program in education there, we wouldn't much care, provided we could avoid all of the negatives and the damage. But I'm glad to be able to report that academically, homeschooling offers you tremendous advantages. And the reason that it does is because homeschooling allows for individualized tutoring rather than classroom instruction. Any of you who've had an experience teaching in a classroom, whether it be a Sunday school classroom or a conventional school classroom, you know already classroom control is difficult. Even if you have good kids, well-behaved kids who really want to learn, it can be difficult. But when you have even a handful that are not interested in learning, who are only there because they have to be there, and who would just as soon get kicked out, it can be extremely difficult. Those children who have been passed when they shouldn't have been, who don't understand this material, and who really need a lot of additional attention, are going to devour a tremendous amount of class time. Children who are gifted are going to just have to sit there and wait for the rest of the kids to get with the program and understand the material. About 25% of the class at any given moment is either bored or frustrated because the material is either too easy for them or too difficult for them. But when you're tutoring your children at home, you can focus the material on the child that you have in front of you and give him exactly what is appropriate for him right now. Now, there's a tendency for parents to worry about their children not getting what the average child needs. What you don't understand is that you don't have an average child. You've never seen one. You've never met one. An average is a statistical phenomenon. That's all. That means that it never really happens in the real world. Think about it for a moment. It's obvious in a few of the statements that we use when we hear that the average family, for instance, has 1.7 children. Now show me one. Have you ever seen a family with 1.7 children? I said this in one workshop, and a little boy leaned over to his sister and said, "You're 0.7. But honestly, a statistical phenomenon is a composite statement. You take all the families and you count their kids, and then you divide by the total number of families, and you end up with 1.7. That's an average family. But any particular family is going to be different. We're being told today that the traditional family is a thing of the past, that the average family no longer has mom and dad and the kids and all of that. But when you look at the criteria by which they define average, did you know that if you have 3 kids instead of 2, you're not considered a traditional family? That if mom has a job and works at home, stays home with the kids and does something to make money at home, that is not considered a traditional family? And those families with 3 or more kids, families who have the mom with a home business, are thrown in with the gay and lesbian marriages and the single parent situations and all the other non-traditional households. Do you see what somebody once said? As long as liars can figure, figures can lie. And that's what's happening. There's a lot more interest in having a traditional godly household than we're being told by the experts. Because the experts, so many of them, have a social agenda that has something to do with the breakdown and the discarding of the unit that we know of as a household. And so when you're dealing with statistics, you're not dealing with the real world, you're dealing with the numbers. But the real world has 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth, and it's sitting there looking at you across the table. The real world is ready for content, and the content can be delightful and appropriate to the child you have to teach. Now, I use this term delightful a lot, and you'll find out why tomorrow, because we're going to have a session on delight-directed study. Do you realize that your children have been given delights? They get them from various sources. I'll talk about where they get their delights tomorrow. But when your child is delighted in something, you can count on it day after day. It is a strong interest that you can actually build your lesson around. If you have a child with a special hobby, that hobby can become the core around which you can build all kinds of academic work. Your child can learn to read and write and count and do basic arithmetic and study history and science and a lot of other things as they relate to your child's delight. And so when I say that the content of your study can be delightful, I mean just that. It can relate directly to the things that your child's excited about right now. And it can also be appropriate for your child's age. If you have the good fortune of having a very gifted, talented child, let me warn you, a lot of gifted, talented programs encourage your child to climb up into higher levels of material that he may be able to understand intellectually, but he cannot cope with them emotionally. Many gifted children are driven to despair and depression, even suicidal depression, because they are bombarded with information that they don't have the emotional maturity to handle. Just because your child can read a news magazine doesn't mean it's appropriate for him to read it. But what you can do in your homeschool is you can broaden your child, and he can do all kinds of exciting, intellectually challenging things without having to bear the burden that even adults aren't handling very well. Don't talk to your children about endangered species and international hunger and nuclear waste dumps and all these kinds of things and say, we're counting on you as the future leader to solve all these problems. For crying out loud. Do you know what that is at heart? It is treating the child like some kind of humanistic messiah. We're counting on you to fix all the messes that we're creating. We're counting on you to solve all these problems. Hey, I've got news for you. Children need information, yes, but they don't need that kind of responsibility. They need to be protected and given just the things that are appropriate for them. And they can go a long ways with just things like collections and keeping journals and learning to type and work with a computer. They can do all kinds of wonderful things that are intellectually stimulating and challenging without having to get into dangerous and hazardous areas. The method is personal and targeted at ability. Now, by that I mean that you don't need to work with your child as though he were somebody else's child. Even though the average material might be designed for a child who's very visual in orientation and audio in orientation, you might have a child who is kinesthetic. Now that means he's hands-on. He learns best by handling things and doing things. Do you realize there are some children out there who are kinesthetic, tactile learners, and for them to not be allowed to touch something or to handle it is like saying to another child, close your eyes and don't listen. This child needs something that's targeted at his kind of talent. Some children are exceptionally bright, but they're bright with their hands, not with their eyes. They're bright with their hands instead of their ears. The pace is flexible, and it responds to your child's ability. Have you ever been in a situation, those of you who've been homeschooling for a few years, have you ever been in a situation where you find yourself rushing at the end of the year to try to finish the material on time? Has anybody ever done that? Have you ever felt like you were dragging your child through the material? Saying things like, hurry up. We've got to finish this. Because why? Because we're falling behind. We're late. Behind what? Behind the average child. So what? Do you realize your child has a specific level of ability? Forget about what the average child can do. If your child needs a year and a half to finish the third grade arithmetic textbook, take a year and a half. Do you realize that if you do, you will still be about 6 months to a year ahead of the child if he had been in a conventional school? Why? Because in a conventional school, he'd have flunked. He'd have been held back a year. And if he hadn't been held back a year, he'd have just been rushed through, and even though he doesn't understand these things, he'd be just expected to get it later somehow. So figure it out. You're not behind when you take your time and do it right the first time. You're way ahead. I grew up in the Midwest, and one of the jobs that you could always find, when we hear about everybody being unemployed, think about this. You could always find work cleaning stalls in the Midwest. I mean, there was work piling up somewhere every day. And I would get a job after school cleaning stalls for local farmers. One day I was in a real hurry. I just wanted to get it done and get paid. And so I wasn't really cleaning the stall, I was leveling it out. You know, kind of knocking off the high places and filling in the low places. It was all rather biblical when I look back on it now. But unbeknownst to me, the farmer came in. And he's watching me for a while, and he says, "Well, Gregg, you in a hurry?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I am." He says, "Well, if you don't have time to do it right, you sure don't have time to do it over." And I realized that if I didn't do it right, if I didn't do it correctly, he wouldn't pay me. So I might as well take the time to do it right the first time, get paid, and get on my way. But ever since that time, whenever I find myself rushing something that really shouldn't be rushed, I hear his voice again. If you don't have time to do it right, you sure don't have time to do it over. You can give your children all the time they need to do it right the first time. If you happen to have a child who's exceptionally gifted and who can work through that same third grade arithmetic book in 6 months, great. You're 3 months ahead of who? The average child again. Forget him. He doesn't really exist. You've got a child who just happened to be able to finish this particular textbook a little more quickly than the publisher thought you would be able to do. So what do you do now? You pick up the next year's textbook and you just begin right where you left off and keep right on going. You don't stop school. You don't say, "Well, great, you're done for the year. No more arithmetic for a year." No, you dummy. What you'll do is you'll lose your momentum. Your child's got momentum now. He's excited about this subject. Keep it a secret from him. He doesn't need to know that other kids take a whole year to do this. And do you know what will happen? In just a matter of a year, when you're in the grocery store, and inevitably there's going to be a lady, you'll find yourself there a little too early in the day. And the lady in the grocery store, maybe it's the cashier, she's going to say, "Well, is it a holiday? Why isn't this child in school?" Sometimes they don't even ask you. They go right to the child. They say, "Why aren't you in school? What grade are you in, honey?" And your child looks at them and goes, "What subject?" Do you mean to tell me there are children out there that are in the same grade in every subject? How can that happen? You'd have to be really average to do that. I mean, you couldn't be gifted in anything, you couldn't have any trouble in anything, you'd have to really be average to be in the same grade in every subject. Think about it. Nobody stays in the same grade if they're allowed to study at the level that they're able to. If they can go at the pace that's appropriate for them, they're going to be in junior high and high school years before they even get out of the elementary school years. And there are going to be some subjects they're going to struggle in. Usually gifting in one area shows up as a weakness in another area. I happen to have the gift of creative spelling. You know, creative people tend to struggle with spelling because you have to do it the same way every time. I can think of 3 good ways to spell that word. I just thank God that they invented spelling checkers on the computer. Review is timely and adequate. You don't have to do, for instance, all the practice problems that are in a conventional textbook. I know they're going to make it sound as though you better do them, but the truth is, if you do every 3rd problem on the page and your child's not making any mistakes, you can probably go on to the next concept and begin work. You see, those practice problems are built into the curricula in order to give the classroom teacher some time to devote a little personal attention to each child. Now, how do you keep 25 students occupied while you're trying to help a struggling student over here on the side? The answer is seat work, practice problems. Another word for it would be busy work. Now, if you want your child to stay busy, you can have him do the dishes. I mean, there are lots of different ways where you can keep your children occupied while you work with another child. You don't need to have them lose their interest in arithmetic in order to keep them occupied. And so whether it be diagramming sentences, or whether it be in arithmetic, or any other area, if you find several pages of practice problems, you don't have to do it all in most cases. You can just adjust it to what you feel is appropriate for your child. And finally, testing is diagnostic and non-threatening. By that I mean, when your children take a test or quiz, they shouldn't have to be worried about it. They shouldn't get stressed out. Because taking that quiz or test is a lot like taking your child's temperature. Nobody crams for a good temperature. I mean, the whole idea of taking a temperature is to give accurate information to the person who's taking care of you. And that's the relationship in homeschooling. You don't want a child who shows up really well on the test, better than really is deserved. You want the truth. If this child is struggling in any area, you want it to show up because that allows you to know what to do next for that child. So many times we find ourselves using techniques and approaches in our homeschooling that really come from somewhere else, and maybe in some other setting like a classroom it would make sense, but when you get home it really doesn't. And that brings us to the lifestyle advantages. In homeschooling, you're going to be able to design a lifestyle that responds to your values, your priorities, and your obligations. Now, this word lifestyle, sometimes I get into certain parts of the country and I say lifestyle and they all think, oh, California dreaming, hot tubbing it, designing a lifestyle. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about making those decisions, strategic decisions that affect the way you live. For instance, what time should kids get up in the morning? Anybody got any ideas? What's the right time for kids to get up? Early, right? Early. Kids should get up early. But what is early? 6, okay. 8. Anybody else got a suggestion? Okay. Okay. Now let me tell you what I think. I think children should get up at whatever time is giving them enough sleep after having stayed up as late as they should have stayed up. So let's talk about when should kids go to bed? Huh? I think the answer is it depends. I'm not hedging on this. Because, you see, we live in a culture in which dad doesn't stay home and work very often. I'm in the school of thought, people ask me sometimes, is a woman's place in the home? I don't think so. Not necessarily. I think a woman's place is at her husband's side. And a husband's place is in the home. Now, when you've got so many men having to leave home to make a living today, when they come home, usually it's about 5:30, 6, or later. And if you've got your youngsters going to bed at 8 o'clock just because that's the time everybody else, why does everybody else go to bed at 8 o'clock? Because they got to get up early enough to catch the big yellow monster that's going to drive by. You see, if they miss the big yellow monster, then you have to take them yourself to school. And so that's why so many kids have to go to bed early, because they have to get up early because they're on the school superintendent's schedule, not yours. Do you realize homeschool children can really get to know their fathers because they can stay up later and be with Dad and have time. Dad may even be teaching a few lessons. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. In the session on homeschooling hazards, we're going to talk about passive dads and active toddlers and discouragement. And I would like to encourage you men, I do encourage you men, to be here for that. I'm going to poke some fun, poke at you a little bit, but it's all intended to help you see your household as a management responsibility. It needs your leadership, and you can be a part of this homeschool, not just the guy on the sidelines cheering, but you can actually be throwing some field goals. You can be making some of those passes yourself. And so children can get to know their parents better because their sleeping schedules are decided based upon what's best for the whole family. Children can sleep in late in the morning depending upon when you decided was most appropriate for them to go to bed the night before. That's what I mean by designing a lifestyle. You can actually organize your routines to respond to your interests and your values and your needs rather than always having to adjust for some guy you may never have even met before who sits in an office somewhere else and decides this is when school should start. Homeschooling is a lot more cost effective. For one thing, you get a lot more for your money. When you purchase a textbook, you are going to find yourself with an investment. If you don't destroy it, if you don't tear it up, you'll be able to sell that later. It's a liquid investment. You can actually unload a lot of old... This is not like baby shoes you have to bronze. This stuff is just an investment, and you use it as long as it's useful to you. If you've got other children coming up behind it, keep it until the last one's used it, and then sell it. But that textbook should be used as a resource as long as you need it, and then you can get rid of it. So in homeschooling, after you've spent your money, you still have an asset there, and you can go and sell that asset and get your money back again. You also get more out of each textbook because the textbooks are used much more aggressively in a homeschool. I would rather my children really master one or two good books on a subject than to be introduced to a smattering from a whole lot of different books. Sometimes we struggle trying to bring together more materials. Don't buy your curriculum by the pound, in other words. Okay, buy it based upon the description of what it's supposed to accomplish, and then make it do that. There's a lot less money involved in school clothes as well. Now, I'm not suggesting your children should be allowed to, run around in their swimming suits all day. I do suggest that your children be taught to have good taste, to have modesty, to dress as though they respect one another and respect themselves, because they are here to learn. They are not here just to play around. They shouldn't be staying in their pajamas past the time that they get out of bed and go through their normal morning routines of getting ready for the day. But you don't need to be worried about being too much in style. Your children can wear classic clothes. That's a kind of a code word for hand-me-downs, They can get away with a lot of things. Now, please understand, though, your kids will know what's in style. They'll even know what the jargon is to use. They'll learn all of this in church, okay? When they go to church, they'll find out which tennis shoes they should be wearing, which T-shirts are really in, which jackets are in. And I remember in one particular case, this was several years ago, when the word dude was really popular. Joshua got a call from one of his friends in church, and he must have said dude 30 times in one conversation. Dude this, dude that, dude this. I looked at him and I said, man. And then I realized what I'd said, and I decided not to say anything. So kids are going to pick up these things. They're going to understand what's... In other words, you don't need to be so afraid they're going to be nerds, because they will understand what is accepted and unaccepted just in the normal exposure they have in any extracurricular activities you have, in youth groups, if they get involved in soccer or team sports or anything like that, Awana, various 4-H clubs, scout troops, all these things provide your children with opportunities to be with other children in a much more controlled way. There's much less likelihood that your children will get into trouble in those contexts unless you leave them under the care of people you don't really know or people that you don't have any basis to trust. Okay? So I'm talking about things like organize your own scout troops, organize your own 4-H clubs. Make sure that you're dealing with people that share your values and your convictions and have a sense of right and wrong. You'll have a lot fewer opportunities for your children to get hurt or in trouble if you do that. And finally, home business opportunities abound for your students to use in underwriting the costs of these extracurricular activities. I think extracurricular activities are great, and I think you should be involved in them. But I believe that your children from around the age of 13 on should be responsible for paying for at least part of these expenses. Now, in Psalms 112, in verse 1 through 3, we read, "Praise the Lord! Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who finds great delight in His commands. His children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in His house, and His righteousness endures forever." At the time in which the Scriptures were written, it was the norm, it was expected that most people would have their own family business, that they would be self-employed. Not only that, but they would be employing anyone else who needed work. Have you ever wondered about the fact that the Apostle Paul tells us in one place that if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for his own household, you go, wait a minute, what do you mean, especially for his own household? Another translation says, if anyone doesn't provide for his relatives, and especially his immediate family, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's a pretty heavy statement, isn't it? But in another place, the Apostle Paul says, if any will not work, neither shall he eat. Now, if you think of that, well, how am I going to feed my lazy relatives? If any shall not work, he shall not eat. It sounds to me as though God expects you to give your relatives work, to give them a job. And you say, well, how am I going to do that? I can't even find a job myself. Well, maybe God is just trying to give you the opportunity to create work for others rather than waiting for others to create work for you. Now, because I feel so strongly about this, and because my experience with my own family and with my sons have shown me that this is doable, I've designed a workshop entitled the Family Business Workshop. I'm looking forward to making this a part of our national itinerary every year. I hope to be able to present it in this community in the near future. Our first one is going to be presented next month. But in order to follow through on the content of that workshop, on the Family Business Workshop, we're also looking forward to establishing support groups for families who have a home or family business. And that is going to be done through an organization called Home and Family Business Fellowship. We are having our first meeting coming up this Tuesday in my own hometown in Gresham, Oregon. And I invite any of you who are interested and able to attend that to be there. It is a dinner-supper format. I'm going to be the speaker for this first dinner, but we're going to have other guest speakers coming in. It's the first Tuesday of every month, at least in Gresham. And those who may be watching this by video, I encourage you to contact us and look into the possibility of starting a home and family business fellowship for your community. Now, our reason for this is your teenagers are going to need coaching. They're going to need help in order to start these businesses. In order to be successful, they're going to need capital, and that means creative financing. And we're putting together plans. In this workshop, I present all those ideas on how you can launch a side venture for your kids, or if need be, a primary household business for your own family life and income. And all of that is going to be, as I said, a much greater part of my work from this point on. You see, the homeschool community is growing up. There are a lot more families today who have teenagers, and therefore they are needing and asking for information on how to start a real home or family business for those teens as a part of their high school homeschool program. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verses 11 and 12, we read, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business and to work with your hands just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders and you will not be dependent on anybody." Do you realize this is just as much a commandment as "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel"? Sometimes we have difficulty seeing how this passage fits in with other passages that seem to tell us to let our light shine and to go out there and have an impact, to be salt and light for Jesus. In our next session, I'm going to share a little bit of what I believe the answer to that is. How does this fit together with being fully committed to serving Jesus Christ as a family? I believe that the answer is found in the idea that your home is intended to be a very quiet and autonomous, and I mean by autonomous that you have insulation without isolation, that you are to be a quiet embassy of the kingdom of God planted right in the midst of the community that God wants you to touch in His name. Your home doesn't need to be frantic in order to be effective. In fact, the very quietness of minding your own business and working as God has commanded you to and earning the respect of outsiders is going to enhance your ability to let your light shine for Christ and to be effective in evangelism.